In a tutorial for Shapr3D, we're going to start with some very basic elements of the program and app today to kind of get people started and on the right kind of like wavelength for teaching students. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, obviously, when we've got Shapr3D enabled and kind of like all set up and ready to go with your account, is we're going to start a new project. Okay. Now, there's a few things that we want to remove as we're kind of going along this. So we kind of need to see this basic screen here. Now, like most CAD programs, we are kind of met with this sort of like grid elements to it. And we've got our three axes here, X, Y, and Z. Now, really helpfully, in the top right up here, it also kind of like has that as a really simple thing to help students kind of visualize that. Another key thing that students really struggle with is the idea of scale. Now, obviously right now it's really difficult to kind of judge how large or how small the object is that you're creating, and an issue that quite often comes up is that students kind of like scroll too far out or scroll too far in, and as you can see, the grid changes in size as we zoom in and out. Now, to kind of avoid that, we want to change our scale up here. Now, I personally prefer to be at either 5mm or 1mm, depending on what it is that you are producing. If you're making quite a large object, you might want to go and take this up to 10mm or go even smaller. Okay. Now, when you press on the unit section, you can change this depending on what you're doing. But what you can also do is you can lock the grid size. Now, what this means is that no matter how much we zoom out or how much we zoom in, it's going to keep them boxes the same size for the students there. Now, basic controls for a computer. Your middle mouse button is going to allow you to kind of like move the screen around and pan across on here so we can move things. The right mouse button lets you change the angle that you are looking at things. On the iPad, it's quite a lot easier. You can just move around with your fingers exactly as you would kind of like any other applications. It's a little bit kind of different on there, but the rest of the buttons are fairly similar or the exact same. Now, first thing we kind of always want to be looking at to start with an object is we start with a sketch. So we're going to start with sketch, and I'm going to start with on this bottom plane here. Okay. Now, what this is always going to do is it's going to rotate our view. So we're in top down in this case, okay, but if we pick the different plane, it would change to a different view. We're going to make a really kind of simple box shape here. So I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I'm going to draw my box, and I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to make something that's 150 by 100. Now, on here, obviously I can drag this box to make it the different kind of shape. So if I've got 150, okay, but this one here, let's say I just kind of accidentally forgot to change that to be the 100, okay, I can click in there and I can enter my measurements and press enter to change that to the correct shape. And you can edit and move things as you're going along with that. So I've got my sketch finished. I'm going to exit my sketch. Okay, now as you can see, I've got a nice kind of like flat rectangle there, and we want to change that into a 3D object. Okay, and this is kind of how I'll try and get pupils to work, to try and think in 2 dimensions and then produce that into 3 dimensions, and then remove, subtract, and add things to that object there at its most simple kind of area. So I can click on that shape there, and then I can extrude my object. And again, I can just let go of it, and I can kind of go, right, I want that to be 50mm tall, okay, and I can have my object there. Or I can go, okay, that's a bit too small for what I want it to be, let's make that 60, okay, and we've got a nice simple object at this point. Now our next step is going to be adding or removing from this object, and it's exactly the same steps that we've just done. We're going to look at removing now, okay, so I've got this side here, and I'm going to make this cuboid hollow. Okay, there's different ways in which we could do it. So I could go on here and I could press sketch, and I could do exactly what I did before, and I could draw a rectangle, and then I could then exit my sketch, and again, look, we've got 2 different sections here, so I could click on this part and I could push that kind of like into my object here. Now we made this 100 back. So if we were thinking of, we wanted it to be kind of like a nice similar different object, these were 5mm apart, so I want to go backwards 95 and then all my pieces of imaginary wood in this case are exactly the same. What I can also do is I can actually go further than what I've got. So let's go to 101. And what that should then do is make it so the box is hollow. Okay, so we've got our nice hollow object that we've got on here. Now, I'm just going to go back a few steps, so we can press the undo button to kind of go through that. All the standard like controls will work, so like Control and Z should undo and everything like that as well. Another way of producing that same shape, okay, so rather than drawing a box or drawing lines, and I try and get students out of the habit of drawing with lines. It's just not an accurate way to work, and things tend to be like slightly wonky or 1 millimeter off, 0.1 of a millimeter off, and it really kind of like messes with their final outcome. But what we can also do is we've got all these different tools down here. So what I could do is go to offset and chain, and I can click on the edge, and I can then drag that in. So I can do that, press enter, and that will then produce the exact same as having the box, but we're going from our starting point. So if you had something like a curve or a diagonal line, it will do that for you to kind of get that on there. So again, I'm going to minus 101, 101, and just kind of get that on there. So that's our nice, simple way to kind of like add and remove things. We can take other objects and attach them to it, so we can double tap, okay, on an object, and we can move things, we can rotate them. Okay, so there is a lot of object manipulation in there if we want to do different things to it, or we can add another shape. So I could make the similar box and put it inside this one, but that's going to be kind of like a later tutorial. But it's very basic. That is what we are going to be coming up with. Now, another feature that is quite good and quite simple, quite effective for students is the visualization element to it. Now, if they've not set up their education accounts, they're going to not be able to keep this on here. They're going to have to screenshot it. But when they've set up an education account, which is free, they can apply the materials to it, and then they can use the screenshot function and stuff like that. So I can go on and I can add my materials. So I've got my backgrounds, I've got my materials. So I could go down here and I could go, okay, let's make my box shape here. I want to be aluminium. Okay, so I've got a nice shiny metal on there, and because of the lighting is why it's kind of like looking this like dark grey colour. But we can go down, there's all sorts of different materials in here depending on what it is that you're wanting to do, and you can also change the grain pattern, you can rotate them, everything like that inside the material functions at the top. Now, one thing to kind of note is that while we can scale up and down materials, this isn't necessarily going to be super relevant for most pupils because they're going to be making something quite small scale, but at GCSE it's quite useful if you can add that element onto it there. Now, one thing you will notice is because we created this from a single block, it's treating the entirety of this thing that we've created as one piece of wood. So it's changing all of the colour and everything all at once. If we made it from multiple pieces of wood, we'd be able to change all of the materials individually, change the faces and different things like that. So part of the problem we've got here is that if this was an actual piece of wood, the grain pattern should, change along the edge and should change along this side here, which isn't something we can change with this single unibody kind of like construction. For in terms of like showing a client and stuff like that, it's not really a big problem. However, for kind of like really realistic renders for your high-end GCSE pupils and moving up to A-level, you'd want to make your object from different individual pieces and attach and join them together. Okay. What you can then do is you can then capture that object on there. So that should then just produce a screenshot that it will save somewhere else on your device. Try and get pupils out of the habit of screenshotting their kind of like object, because it's not going to produce the highest quality image, whereas when we use the capture button, it's going to give you a PNG, so it's going to stretch really nicely. It's going to be a higher quality image on there that they've got saved separately so they can move it around. Another cool, really basic feature is, this is, I believe, only on the PC at the minute, but should be coming to iPad soon, is the idea of the generative render, which on this we can type what we want. It's just a basic AI tool. When they're using this for coursework, especially for DT, they will need to kind of like reference what they have done, so the quote that they have put in place in order to kind of like fit with JCQ regulations. So just kind of be a little bit careful, but it is quite nice for children lower down in the year groups. I've done this with year 7, looking at pencil pots, and we've kind of like looked through how we can do that. So we could say like place this object on a workshop desk. Obviously check your spelling. And then it will then generate a scene. Now, in the education package, you can only do this 3 times in a day, so you need to be very kind of like judicious with your use, make sure that you're using it correctly. We don't want to be kind of like using this all the time. It's something to kind of like improve and kind of show the work off a little bit. So as you can see, it's generated an image, okay? Obviously, you could then kind of like type in another quote and get something different if that doesn't fit what you want. But it's a really powerful tool to really quickly take a simple 3D object and show it off to a client or somebody else that you kind of like getting to analyze or look through your project, okay? A feature that is on the iPads that is not on the desktop version, so I'm going to screen record this separately on another video, there'd be a third button. And that third button is augmented reality. So what it will do is it will access the camera on the device, and it will allow you to project the item that you have created onto the world around you. So like the desk in front of you or in the client's bedroom. So you could show somebody the actual object that's on there, okay? Which is great because it means that the student can take their iPad off with them and they can go and show their client, this is what it's going to look like, here's how big it's going to be, it's going to fit in this room, here's the different material choices, and get that feedback really, really quickly, okay? Right, so just as a quick recap, we have looked at how to start a new file, we've looked at our different axes, we have looked at how we can change the scale and the units on our thing, our object, whatever it is that we're trying to create. We looked at how to create a simple sketch. We've created a 3D object from that sketch. We then pushed through and removed a section of that, and we have then applied a material to give our object a more realistic look. Okay, thank you. I'll be going through some more complex elements on different videos.